Welcome to Ridgepoint. We're so glad you're here. If you're new to our church, take a moment to connect with us on our website, wenatcheechurch.com. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're in the Wenatchee area, come join us in person sometime. We want to help you grow and connect. Thanks for listening today. Our prayer is that what you hear helps you take the next step in your journey of faith.
You might have heard this story before, but it always catches me off guard when I hear it because I know how crazy it is now that I'm married. But I heard this story a few years back about a husband who on their anniversary handed his wife a card and said, "I love you." And she smiled and said, "Thank you." And then he added this, "And just so you know, if that ever changes, I'll let you know." And I just always, that perplexes me because there's no way. You only say it once and then if that ever changes, I'll let you know. Well, technically, if you think about that, that's consistent, but that's not love. Love that is never expressed really begins to feel like a love that doesn't exist. And we all know this instinctively. If a parent says, "I love my kids," but is never present, never patient, never sacrificial, we question that love. If someone says, "I love my spouse," but they're cold and detached and withholding from them, something doesn't add up. Because love, by its very nature, moves outward. By its very nature, it moves outward. It expresses itself. And here's what's interesting. The scriptures never treat love as a mere internal feeling. When Jesus was asked the greatest commandment, he didn't say, "Feel warmly toward God." He said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength." That's comprehensive love, total, expressed love. And then he says, "And your neighbor as yourself." He's saying love is not just an emotion, it is an orientation. It's devotion towards someone. It's action. Jesus later said, "By this will all know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." In other words, love is visible. It shows up in our attitudes. It shows up in our actions. It shows up in sacrifice. And it shows up in service. Biblically, love is not something we merely feel. It's something we demonstrate. Now here's where it gets even deeper. Not only is love expressed, but the way that we love, the way that it is expressed, reveals something. When love is absent, that reveals something. When love is small, that reveals something. When love is warm and overflowing toward others, it reveals something. The way we love tells a story about what we believe. It reveals how we see ourselves. It reveals how we see grace. It reveals what we truly understand about what God has done for us. And that's exactly what Jesus exposes here in Luke chapter number 7. In this passage, Jesus doesn't command anyone to love more. He simply observes the love that is present. And then he tells us why it's the size that it is. And he shows us that the expression of love is not just some random thing that takes place. It's actually rooted in our own perception. And what we learn from this dinner scene that we're going to look at is this: your love reveals something about you. The way your love is expressed reveals something about you. But before we examine ourselves, let's walk through the story together. Let's step into the room and watch what happens. See the contrast that Jesus draws here, and then we'll come back and ask ourselves what this reveals about us. Let's look at verses 36 through 39, just to kind of how it sets the scene. It says, "Then one of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him. And he went to the Pharisee's house and sat down to eat. And behold, a woman in the city who was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at the table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of fragrant oil and stood at his feet behind him, weeping. She began to wash his feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair of her head. And she kissed his feet and anointed them with the fragrant oil. Now, when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he spoke to himself, saying, 'This man, if he were a prophet, would know who and what manner of woman this is who is touching him, for she is a sinner. So the scene is set in this way. Jesus is invited to a Pharisee's house. Now, why would a Pharisee invite Jesus to their house, especially after, if you were with us last week, he just called them a generation of school children who are never pleased and never okay with whether it was John the Baptizer's ministry and him being a little too harsh, or whether it was Jesus being a little too easy. They were just going to reject it no matter what. They couldn't be pleased. And yet, in the midst of all of that, a Pharisee invites Jesus over to his house. Now, there's several reasons this could be, and this is just my opinion, knowing the culture of it, but it could be that, number one, that the culture or the custom of the time was when there was a rabbi who would teach in a synagogue, it was customary for someone in the area to invite that visiting rabbi to a Sabbath lunch, a Sabbath meal. We saw that actually take place in Peter's house not too long ago with Jesus after a Sabbath teaching. He then goes in and has a Sabbath meal with Peter. So it could be something customary. This man, just out of the customs that they lived out of, that he invited Jesus to come. It could also be that Jesus was kind of a celebrity at this point. He was starting to gain some popularity. It could have been that this Pharisee was like, well, I have all the celebrities at my house, so I'm going to have this one too, just so I can have that notch kind of on my belt of who was here. But whatever the reason, he invites Jesus to come. And it's very interesting what Luke records for us, because culturally, this was significant. It tells us that Luke tells us that Jesus just shows up to the house and sits and starts eating. That was unusual, to just show up to a house and sit and eat. There was like a protocol that was supposed to take place. There were welcome kisses. Now, most of us are probably thankful we don't do this anymore, right? But it was customary that you show up to someone's house and they would kiss you on both cheeks and welcome you into their home. And then they would take some olive oil and they would anoint it on the top of your head, usually to give you some refreshment from the harshness of the sun. And then they would take off your sandals, and one of the servants would come and they would wash your feet before you went in and ate the meal. But it doesn't tell us that any of that took place here, and we know even more that none of this took place because Jesus is about to tell us in a second none of this took place. But Luke very intentionally here says Jesus went in, sat, and starts to eat. And then it tells us that while they're there, a woman who was known as a sinner in the community shows up. Now, a lot of scholars believe that the word sinner here is an implication that this woman might have been a prostitute of some kind. That even the alabaster box that she had might have been an indicator of what she would use it for often in her profession. Now, not going to split hairs over whether she was or not, but the truth is this, it does tell us that she had a reputation for her sin. Whatever the sin was, that was what she was known for in the community. And so she comes and goes into the house, and to kind of set the scene of what it would have looked like, they didn't sit in chairs like what we're sitting at now at a dining room table back then. It was a lower table on the floor, and they would lay down, kind of leaned forward toward the table and eat with one hand and relax on their other arm, and their feet would be out behind them. It was less, it was insanitary, or thought to be, to have your feet close to the table. And so it would have been out from the table. And so this woman comes in and sees what is taking place. Now we think of that and we're like, that's crazy. Who just walks into a house and starts disrupting dinner, right? That's not how we do things customarily. Well, if you look at how houses, especially those who are a little more wealthy in the areas, were built, what often they would do is the house would be built around a little bit of a courtyard, where there would be a table where they would eat, and the three walls, and there would be a gate that would be left wide open so that those walking by could see what kind of people you had in your home, who you were hosting. And so most likely Jesus, being followed by a lot of crowds that would have been followed here and watching. There would have been a lot of people often in these kinds of situations on the outside of the room, on the outside of the courtyard, looking in and seeing what's taking place, especially in this aspect where there's a Pharisee who Jesus just called out them and Jesus in the same room. There would have been probably a lot of people going, I wonder what's about to go down here. I want to see this. So this woman, she's most likely in that group, but she makes her way into the room near Jesus, and she starts weeping. And her tears are falling on Jesus' feet. And then she undoes her hair, which in that time, especially in some of the rabbinic writings at the time, was thought to be borderline pornographic. Like to let your hair down in such a way before men. And so she recklessly abandoned the cultural norms there to wash his feet with the tears in her hair that she was weeping. And then she takes this alabaster box, this fragrant oil, and she takes it and she starts to anoint his feet and wash his feet with them. And I love it because it says this: Simon, this Pharisee, Simon starts to say to himself, this guy can't be a prophet. If he knew what kind of woman this was, that she's a sinner, he would never be letting her touch him. He would never be letting all of this take place in such a public manner. Well, Jesus, hearing him, even though he didn't say it out loud, turns and says this: Simon, I have something to say to you. I love when Jesus does that. Like says like he perceived their thoughts. He turns and he says, Simon, I have something to say to you. Pick it up with me in verse number 40. And Jesus answered and said to him, Simon, I have something to say to you. So he said, Teacher, say it. There was a certain creditor who had two debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. And when they had nothing with which to repay, he freely forgave them both. Tell me, therefore, which of them will love him more? Simon answered and said, I suppose the one whom he forgave more. And he said to him, You have rightly judged. So Jesus says, I have something to say to you, Simon. He goes, well, go on and say it then. And Jesus says, well, let me tell you a story. There were two men who both owed a lot to a creditor. Both were indebted to him. One owed 500 denarii. This would have been quite a bit of money. Some estimate between a year's worth of wages to 20 months worth of wages. And then the other one owed 50, about a month to 2 months' wages. And so these people, the idea though here is not the amount that they owed, but the idea here is what Jesus said, and when neither of them could repay. It didn't matter that one had more in debt to the creditor than the other. The fact was they were both in the same state. They both could not repay the debt. Jesus is making a spiritual connection here, okay? He's about to say very clearly, just as much as this woman is indebted because of her sin, Simon, I'm trying to teach you, you are too. He's trying to make a connection here. You see her as a sinner. Simon, you're a sinner too. Yeah, she might be a 500-point sinner, and you're a 50-point sinner. But the truth is this, neither of you can repay the debt. That's what he's trying to connect here. Neither of you can repay the debt. And he says this, so let's say the creditor forgave both of them. Who's going to love the creditor more? And Simon goes, well, I suppose. I see him like acting cautious with his answer because he's seen what Jesus has done before when the Pharisees give answers. Well, I suppose the one who he forgave more. Jesus says, that's right. You've judged this situation rightly. Now then look in verse 44. It says this, then he turned to the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she has washed my feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair of her head. You gave me no kiss, but this woman has not ceased to kiss my feet since the time I came in. You did not anoint my head with oil, but this woman has anointed my feet with fragrant oil. Therefore I say to you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But to whom little is forgiven, the same loves little. Then he said to her, your sins are forgiven. And those who sat at the table with him began to say to themselves, who is this who even forgives sins? Then he said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. So I think it's interesting. It says this. After he says this little story, he goes, Simon, you've rightly judged this situation. he turns to the woman, but he's still speaking to Simon. He says, do you see this woman? Of course he saw her. She's all he could think about during this dinner at this time. He was thinking in his own heart, who in the world? She's ruined everything. He's like, do you see this woman? She has done so much more for me than you have. She's expressed love toward me that you have not expressed. He delivers these contrasts. I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet. She's washed my feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair of her head. You gave me no kiss, but this woman has not ceased to kiss my feet since the time I came in. You did not anoint my head with oil, but this woman has anointed my feet with fragrant oil. The reality is here, Jesus is not demanding royal treatment. He's simply pointing out even basic courtesies that normally take place when you walk in a house were withheld from him by this Pharisee. Simon's welcome was polite. Lord, you can come and eat dinner at my house, but it was restrained. He wasn't really showing love. If he was, it was very little, the comparison here is being made. Then comes the interpretive key of the whole passage there in verse 47. I say to you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much, but to whom little is forgiven, the same loves little. Jesus is not saying her love earned her forgiveness. The parable makes that clear. The debt was forgiven freely. He's saying her love reveals that she understands the depth of her forgiveness. Then he says directly to her, your sins are forgiven. And the other guests begin to murmur, who is this even who forgives sins? Because that's the real issue in the room. Not that the woman's past, not just the social awkwardness, but Jesus' authority. And then finally he says, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. That word peace is significant. She entered the room with a reputation. She leaves the room with peace. And then you just see this comparison. Simon invited Jesus to dinner, but he's left there at the table, and this woman leaves justified, forgiven. So what just happened in that room? Jesus didn't command anyone to love more. He simply observed the love that was present. And then he explains why it was the size that it was. He told Simon, in essence, the reason her love is overflowing is because she knows she's been forgiven much. And the reason your love is restrained is because you believe you have been forgiven little. In other words, your love is revealing something in you, Simon. The way we express love reveals something deeper about us. And that brings us to the heart of the passage. Two truths for us this morning that rise out of this story, and both of them are diagnostic for us. First of all, your love reveals your self-assessment. Your love, the expression of your love reveals your self-assessment. How you see yourself will shape how you love. Let's look again at Simon and the woman side by side. Simon sees himself as respectable. He's the host. He's religious. He's morally clean, at least compared to her, he thinks. When he looks at the woman, he thinks, she's a sinner. Do you hear the comparison? She is a sinner. Not we are sinners. She is a sinner. The truth is, when we start to compare ourselves with other people, like Simon, his self-assessment was really built on comparison. Well, I'm better than. When we have that comparison in our life, it always distorts our self-perception. When you measure yourself against other sinners instead of against a holy God, you can begin to feel spiritually secure. You can begin to feel like you really don't owe much. And if you believe you owe little, the truth is your love will shrink. Now look at the woman. She doesn't defend herself. She doesn't justify herself. She doesn't argue about her reputation. She knows who she is. She doesn't come into the room thinking, I deserve to be here. She comes into the room thinking, I need mercy. That's a radically different self-assessment. Simon sees himself as relatively righteous. She sees herself as deeply needy. And that difference shapes everything here. When you see yourself as pretty good, you will love cautiously and in small ways. But when you see yourself as deeply forgiven, you will love freely. Let's just make it practical for us this morning. If we see ourselves as forgiven little, it becomes very easy to criticize other people for their sins and their shortcomings. When someone falls or when someone struggles or when someone's past is messy, if you believe you're spiritually ahead, then you will stand at the table like Simon, and you will observe and you will analyze and you will criticize others. You may not say it out loud, but in your heart you will think, how could they? Why would they? Or they should know better. But when you see yourself as a sinner who has been loved by a great Savior, criticism softens into compassion for others. Because you know, apart from grace, that could be you. You stop saying, how could they? And you start saying, but for the grace of God. Your self-assessment shapes your response to others. And it also shapes your willingness to be vulnerable. Simon, he protects his dignity. He offers no tears, no public affection, no visible humility. Why? Because he doesn't feel desperate. But the woman is not worried about what others think. She lets down her hair. She weeps openly. She kisses his feet repeatedly. Why? Because when you know you were rescued, your reputation is secondary to your service. If you see yourself as someone who barely made it in by mercy, you won't be paralyzed by the opinions of others. You won't be too proud to worship. You won't be too proud to serve or too proud to admit your weaknesses. Okay, so let's bring that into how we serve in the church. If I believe I was forgiven little, service can subtly shift into something I'm offering from a position of strength. Like I'm helping God out in some way. I'm bringing something to the table here. I'm doing my part for God because He really needs me. And it becomes measured by performance rather than measured by our hearts. And while there is a healthy sense in which we participate in the work of God, when that participation flows from a quiet sense of spiritual superiority, something changes. Service starts to become selective. We only serve then where it's comfortable. We only serve where it fits our preferences. We only serve where it preserves our own image and where we are kept in control. But if you see yourself as someone who has been forgiven much, service doesn't feel like you're doing God a favor. It feels like you get to respond to mercy. You're not thinking, what role makes me look best? You're thinking, where is there a need? And you're moved by gratitude. Do you see the difference? Your love in worship, in relationships, in service, your expression of love reveals your self-assessment. So here's the question this passage presses on us. Do you see yourself as spiritually secure or spiritually saved? Do you see yourself as having been relatively righteous and good? Or do you see yourself as radically forgiven? Because the way you answer that question will determine whether your love is measured or whether it overflows, like the woman here. And that leads us into the second reality this passage exposes. Your love reveals something about you. It reveals your self-assessment, how you see yourself, but it also reveals your grace awareness. It reveals your grace awareness. So we come to the center of the story. If the first point exposes how we see ourselves, this point exposes how we understand grace. Because Jesus does not leave this as a mystery. He tells us plainly why the love in that room looks so different between these two. He says it there in verse 47, her sins which are many are forgiven, for she loved much, but to whom little is forgiven, the same loves little. That sentence is the interpretive key of the story. Now, let's be careful. Jesus, again, is not saying her love earned her forgiveness. He's just told a parable about two debtors who had nothing with which to repay. And yet the creditor freely forgave them both. Forgiveness is free. It's not purchased with tears. It's not earned with perfume. It's not secured by emotion. Forgiveness is freely given. So what's Jesus saying? He's saying that love is evidence. Love is the fruit, and forgiveness is the root. The size of the fruit reveals the size of our perceived forgiveness. Simon's love is small because his awareness of grace is small. The woman's love is overflowing because her perception of grace is overwhelming. And this is the heart of the passage. The issue is not how sinful she was compared to Simon. The issue is how aware she was of her forgiveness compared to Simon. Simon doesn't feel deeply forgiven. She does. Simon does not feel like a debtor who had nothing with which to repay. She does. And that awareness changes everything. It's our awareness of how much grace we've been given that will affect our expression of love. Let's say I heard it illustrated this way before. Maybe you're chatting with your neighbor, right? You're out in your front yard, and your neighbor comes out and says, "Hey, your mail ended up in my mailbox again. It was a bill, and I just went ahead and paid it for you." First of all, you'd be like, "Wow, okay." What's the first question, though, that's probably coming to your mind? What bill? What bill? Okay, which bill? Well, if the answer to that question was, you used to have a library card like 7 years ago. It was like a $10 fee from some overdue book. I just went ahead and paid the library for. You'd be like, "Oh, I don't even go to the library anymore." Okay, whatever. But what if he was like, "Oh, it was your statement. You had about $800,000 left on your mortgage, and I just went ahead and paid it off for you." You'd be like, "Say that again? What?" Like the thought goes from, the like little fee from the library card, you might get a thanks out of you, maybe, but it's just like, oh, okay, cool. But like a huge debt, like the rest of your house payment, especially if you have most of it still left to go, the response would be, how could I ever repay this guy back? How could I ever repay that back? There's no way that I could repay that kind of love. But let me say this plainly for us this morning. When it comes to Jesus, you will never love Jesus more than you believe you were forgiven. Did you catch that? You will never love Jesus more than you believe you were forgiven. If grace feels small to you, your love will be small. If grace feels ordinary to you, your worship will be ordinary. If forgiveness feels expected to you, your service will be measured. But when grace feels massive, when you know you were not just improved, but you were rescued from sin, totally forgiven, not just helped, but saved to the uttermost, love cannot stay contained. Look at the woman again. She's not performing. She's not trying to impress the room. She is overwhelmed. And that's what grace does. When grace grips you, love spills out. So let's make that personal. Has grace grown small in our eyes? Do you still remember what you were forgiven from? Or has time dulled the edge of it? It's very possible to be around Jesus for years and lose the wonder of our forgiveness. You can sing the songs, you can hear the sermons, you can serve in ministries, and yet forgiveness can begin to feel trivial or routine or ordinary. And when grace becomes trivial or diminished in our eyes, our love begins to get cold. Worship becomes mechanical, prayer becomes brief, service becomes burdensome. You start asking, how much do I have to give? How often do I have to show up? What's required of me? That's small grace thinking. But when you remember that you were spiritually dead, that you had nothing with which to repay the debt, that God did not simply improve you, but pardoned you from a death sentence, it changes how you love. You become patient with difficult people because you remember how patient God was with you. You become compassionate towards messy sinners because you remember you were once one. You become generous in service because you know you deserved judgment and not mercy. And on a day like today, Serve Sunday, this is where it lands for us. We don't serve just because we're needed. We serve because we are forgiven. We don't serve to secure God's favor. We serve because we already have God's favor. We don't serve to prove something. We serve because something has already been proven at the cross. When grace is massive in our heart, serving children is not a chore. Greeting guests is not beneath you. Showing up early is not inconvenient. Giving financially is not painful. Loving difficult people is not optional. These things become more natural because forgiven people love much, and loving people serve much. So here's the question Jesus leaves hanging in that dining room. Is your love little, or is your love much? It's a question we need to ask ourselves this morning. Am I loving little, loving God little, loving others little, or am I loving much? And the antidote for little love is also given here in the passage, and it's not try harder to love bigger. It's not the antidote here. It's become re-enamored with the gospel. Become re-enamored with the grace of God for your life. If your love is little, don't try to manufacture emotion. Go back to grace. If your worship feels cold, don't try to hype yourself up. Go back to the cross. If your service feels heavy, don't grit your teeth. Go back to grace and forgiveness. Because the solution to little love is not more effort, it's deeper awareness. The woman did not leave with a command, she left with peace. Your faith has saved you. Go in peace. Peace flows from forgiven debt, and forgiven debt produces overflowing love. So church, if we want to be a church marked by warmth and compassion and generosity and joyful service, it doesn't happen by pushing people harder. Serve Sunday isn't about us going, do more, do more, do more. That's not the point of this day. That starts to become who our church is when we see grace more clearly. Because our love reveals our grace awareness. And when grace grows massive in our hearts, love does not stay small. Now, as we close, notice how the dinner scene ends quietly. There's no applause. There's no argument. Just one woman walking out in peace and one Pharisee left sitting at the table. And the truth is that contrast is still sitting in this room today. Because there are really only two kinds of people here, those who know they've been forgiven much, and those who either believe they need little forgiveness or maybe have never received it at all. Maybe you're here this morning, and if you're honest, you've never experienced what this woman experienced. You've tried to be good, you've tried to improve yourself, you've compared yourself to others and thought, I'm not that bad, but you've never come to Jesus for forgiveness and salvation. You never said, I've had nothing with which to repay. What's interesting to me is if you, and this is, make this clear, the Bible doesn't tell us this, but this is my opinion based on my study. You follow the chronology of Jesus' life and ministry. You know what he preached right before this took place? Those famous words in Matthew chapter 11. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon me. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I'm gentle and lowly of heart. Come to me and you will find rest for your souls. That happened right before this in the life of Jesus. I believe most likely what happened was the woman heard that and took him up on the offer. Here, I'm coming to him. And you know what she leaves with? Rest for her soul. Forgiveness. Truth is, that can be you today. Come to Jesus and find rest for your soul because of the forgiveness that he brings. This is where the gospel begins. The parable here makes it clear. Both debtors had nothing to repay, and the creditor freely forgave them both. That's the gospel. You cannot repay your sin. You cannot earn your forgiveness. You cannot offset your guilt with good works, but Jesus can forgive it. Not because you cry enough, not because you serve enough, not because you clean yourself up, but because he paid the debt. At the cross, Jesus bore the full weight of our sin, not just for the obviously broken, but even for the religious and respectable. This same Jesus who said to her, your sins are forgiven, is the same Jesus who can say that to you today. And if you're here and you've never placed your faith in Jesus, not in morality or in church attendance or in your comparison of righteousness with other people, but your faith in Jesus alone, if you've never done that, today you can. Today you can move from being spiritually secure in yourself to spiritually saved by Jesus' grace. You can walk out with what she walked out with, peace. And if you've never made that decision, I'll in just a moment invite you to do so today. But for those of us who do know him, let me ask you this morning, has grace grown small? Has forgiveness become familiar? Has our love cooled? If your love is little in your worship, in your compassion, your relationships with others, in your service, don't try to force it. Return to the cross. Remember the debt. Remember that you had nothing with which to repay. Remember, he freely forgave you because your love will never outgrow your awareness of grace. If we see ourselves rightly as debtors that are forgiven, we will love deeply. If we remember grace clearly, we will serve joyfully. So whether you need to receive forgiveness for the first time or whether you need to remember it again, the invitation for us is the same today. Come to Jesus' feet. And when you walk away in peace. Because forgiven people love much. And when grace is massive in our hearts, the truth is our love will not stay small. It will, like this woman, become an overflowing love because of our view of how massive the grace is that we've been given.
Thanks so much for watching. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe so you never miss a message. Maybe share this message with someone who could be encouraged by it. And if you want to support what God is doing here at Ridgepoint, visit WenatcheeChurch.com. May God bless you and strengthen you as you follow him, and we'll see you next time.